freedom of speech,
fundamental rights,
freedom of conscience,
academic freedom,
freedom of press,
and the right to listen.
You're listening to So to Speak, the free speech podcast, brought to you by FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Welcome back to So to Speak, the free speech podcast, where every other week we take an uncensored look at the world of free expression through personal stories and candid conversations. I am, as always, your host, Nico Perino, joined by my two colleagues, Aaron Terr and Will Creeley. They've been on the show before. Welcome back, gentlemen.
It is a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So were you the director of public advocacy last time you were on the show, Aaron?
I think I was.
I think you just were, because I think we did briefly talk about the role that public advocacy now plays within FIRE, which is sort of non-litigation advocacy related to FIRE's off-campus mission. You've been doing a lot of really good work on that front here. And Will, of course, the legal director. Let's jump right in. This weekend is the Super Bowl, and there was an interesting case that came across our desks in recent weeks involving Super Bowl clean zones. Have you guys heard of this before?
I have now. Nothing surprised me with the NFL. The NFL is like the ultimate corporate behemoth. And this is, I think, Exhibit A of what that means for local municipalities.
Well, they want total control over kind of their brand and the experience. So what was happening here in Phoenix, Arizona, where the Super Bowl is set to take place this weekend, was the city council passed a resolution establishing a quote-unquote clean zone that requires property owners to apply for a permit to display temporary signage, which the city defines as, quote, anything that is not physically built into your business, such as posters, flyers, banners, pennants, flags, window paintings, and even balloons. Our Jordan Howell, who wrote the article on our website about this, said, sorry, parents, but the direct decorations for your kid's birthday party will now need the approval of the NFL and the Arizona Super Bowl host committee. And this is a pretty restrictive policy. It was in place from January 15th through February 19th, or that's what the regulation stated, and occupied a nearly 2 square mile zone in downtown Phoenix. Now, there was a lawsuit brought by the Goldwater Institute in Arizona challenging this, and the judge, a trial judge down there in Arizona, issued, a restraining order saying that Phoenix had 48 hours to comply with the court order. I mean, what's wrong with this from a constitutional standpoint?
Where do we start? I'm a Buffalo Bills season ticket holder, lifelong football fan, football apologist in some circles, right? I will make no bones about it. I love the game. Hell, I even coached my son in second grade flag football with officially licensed NFL shirts. But there is nothing cool about this, and I will not make any apologies for the league in this instance. I mean, it's just gross, right down from the phrasing, right? This clean zone. I mean, ugh.
Yeah, I was thinking.
I thought it was going to be no drugs or alcohol in this sentence, but apparently no First Amendment.
Clean zone. I mean, the adjective Orwellian gets tossed around to an alarming degree in our line of work, but man, clean zone, as if speech, unregulated by this gigantic corporate enterprise is dirty, and if I'm really want to level with the audience here, and this is not going to surprise anybody, but the reason this is happening is so they can sell advertising, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, for years you've heard jokes that every local business right around this time of year can't talk about come get your wings or come down to the Acme supermarket to get your hoagie platter for the Super Bowl. You got to say the big game. And this is like the ultimate instance of the NFL saying, we're bigger than you, local government. You're going to sign away your citizens' free speech rights if we're going to come bring our party to your town.
And you're going to put us on the board to determine whether a private
right.
business owner can put up a balloon or a sign in their private business.
Yeah.
Which is just...
And one of the other problems with it is that there were no standards to kind of guide those decisions about when you ask for permission from the NFL. Can I put up this sign? It's kind of just there. Have full discretion to decide, apparently, whether to accept or reject that request.
Is this something that's happened before?
Yeah. I think there was a clean zone in Tampa.
Yeah, I'm 100% sure they didn't just think of this. So the Philly, where we're sitting now, had the draft a couple years ago, the NFL draft on Museum Parkway down by the Art Museum, and they lock it down, And I'm sure that was a little bit different, but it is a kind of super governmental entity, right? Like, it's bigger than government. It's bigger than damn near anything. It's the NFL coming to town. It's like a big corporate spaceship comes in and zaps all your local leaders' brains and removes all their rules and laws and says, now hear this. Clean zone.
Well, I'm trying to imagine how this all goes down, right? You're a city and you're trying to pitch the NFL to bring the Super Bowl to your city, to your town, right? Because it has a lot of economic benefit for the community.
In theory.
And one of the things you pitch is, hey, essentially, we'll remove all of our citizens' First Amendment rights within a 2 square mile perimeter for a month surrounding the Super Bowl if you come here. And to the extent any of them want to advertise, we'll put you on the committee that will determine whether those advertisements or that signage gets approved.
Yeah.
So it's an incentive to the Super Bowl to come to that city, right? Does the city, now that the law has been struck down, owe anything to the NFL, right? Presumably the NFL signs a advertisement or a promotional agreement with Bud Light, right? And says you're going to have exclusive marketing permission within this 2 square mile zone. Joe's Tavern on the corner, to hell with them. They're not going to be able to advertise Miller Lite.
Yeah, I bet you it's a field day. The real winners in all this, right, besides the citizens and Joe's Tavern, like you're saying, are probably the lawyers, right? Because they all of a sudden like, wait a second, we get to delve into the nooks and crannies of this contract to figure out exactly who's on the hook for what. It reminded me a little bit, and this is a bad comparison for the NFL and for Phoenix, but it reminded me a little bit of the World Cup in Qatar, where at the last minute, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm remembering correctly, the Qatari officials were like, wait a second, you know what? We said you were going to have these drinking stations here, and Budweiser, we know you paid hundreds of millions to secure that access, but now that we think about it, we're going to scrap that. You can't actually drink there. And there are these hilarious stories about like the few hotels that were serving foreigners that were allowing people to drink there, and like English fans getting there like 2 hours before the game and trying to drink as many beers as they could in 2 hours. But I mean, like that's kind of what we're talking about here in terms of instead of the Qatari government, now we're talking about the NFL, right? We are going to set the terms of engagement here. And yeah, I bet you it's a nice little mess, just like it probably was for Budweiser and Qatar and FIFA when Qatar changed its mind about drinking. But to hell with all that. That's their problem.
Right? Yeah.
From where I'm sitting, great work, Goldwater Institute. Credit to them.
Because I don't think a legal challenge had been brought.
Right.
First Amendment challenge had been brought to one of these.
It blows my mind.
Before, so.
I wish we would have had this case.
No kidding. No kidding.
We might have known about it first if it wasn't. If the Super Bowl was in Philadelphia.
That's a serious thing, actually. Well, by the way,
we almost lost Will.
Civil liberties FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. I get that all the time, and I know you folks do too, right? You see an awesome case, and then you see somebody else bringing it, and all I can do is tip my hat and say, "Damn, I wish that was me."
We talked about one this morning, right, involving a bakery. I forget where.
Oh yeah, the IJ case.
Yeah, the Institute for Justice had a case involving a bakery. I forget where. It's some local community somewhere, and they hired school children, I believe, or they allowed for school children to paint a mural on the bakery or next to the bakery.
Call the cops.
They didn't know what the mural was going to be, but the mural ended up being something that included bagels in it, right?
Yeah, it was related to baked goods in some way, yeah.
And the city said because the mural had something to do thematically with the business, it needed prior city approval before it could be put up. So this is like a classic IJ case. Yeah. One of our colleagues, Alicia, was like, if ChatGPT could have come up with an IJ case, this would have been it, right?
A perfect Institute for Justice case, yeah. And that's one I'm
involving commercial speech, which is their bread and butter.
Yep, absolutely. Stupid local rules. Yeah, that was a perfect one. I also think of
and that was the city. They filed a lawsuit on it, and I think the ordinance is on hold pending the outcome of the lawsuit.
Yeah. And I think of the one from last summer with the Delaware woman who had just beaten cancer and got the vanity plate FK cancer. Fuck cancer, right? And she's riding around. She's starting like conversations. As I recall, people would come up to her, crying, say, I saw your license plate. It really means a lot to me. And that she would trade stories. It's a beautiful thing, right? This moment of triumphant resilience in the face of lethal disease. And then, it was, 6 to 9 months later, all of a sudden Delaware says, yeah, we're going to claw that back. We need that license plate back. It's offensive. And I was like, this is the perfect case. I wanted that case so badly. And ACLU of Delaware snagged it. So again,
Those cases aren't unique, though. Haven't those like kind of vanity license plate cases gone up to the Supreme Court?
Well,
a couple of appellate courts.
The one that went up, the courts have weighed in on the famous license plate case before the Supreme Court is Maynard v. Willie, right? Live free or die on the New Hampshire license plate. But our colleague Adam Steinbaugh just wrote an amicus brief in a license plate case, which is on our website, filed it within the last 2 months. I don't know. It's been a blizzard of amicus briefs lately, but that's
we have a new amicus attorney, right?
We have an amicus attorney. We probably need 3 of them. Yeah. Abby Smith, who's done great work, joining us from Beckett. Yeah. Anyway, but this is nuts. So kudos to Goldwater. Great result. Boo to the NFL. Get your act together. You're not bigger than.
Sometimes I kind of like the new rules or regulations they put in place or take away in cities surrounding the Super Bowl. I was going to Indiana University during one of the Super Bowls. All I know is the Super Bowl happened to land around my birthday. So we went up to Indianapolis, and they had removed their open container law.
There you go.
So you were able to walk around downtown, and it was this very festive environment. And they never brought it back. I think there are very few cities now that have done away with their open container regulations. New Orleans is one of them, and Indianapolis is another one. It's bizarre.
Let me see. Would I trade open container regulations for First Amendment rights for private businesses? No.
It's not an either or scenario.
You can do both. You can do both.
You can drink in the clean zone.
There you go. Drink in the clean zone. I'm going to start using that around my house. I say, sorry, kids, I'm instituting a clean zone here.
I'm worried that college and universities are going to pick up on that phrase. It's almost like the opposite of a free speech zone.
It is
like
so
you have the
gross.
free speech zone, and then you have the clean zone where you can't.
Ugly euphemisms. Free speech zone and then clean zone. Also gross.
Since we're in Philadelphia, it might be worth asking. When Philadelphia wins championships or goes to Super Bowls, the city seems to come out in force. Broad Street seems to be a location right in the center of city for those who aren't in Philadelphia, leading right to City Hall. And citizens like to climb lampposts, bus shelters. I'm assuming this sort of
people who fell through a bus shelter.
I saw that. Yeah, there's a whole genre of TikTok and Instagram reels that demonstrate the raucousness of Philadelphia celebrations, but not protected speech. I'm assuming too.
Yeah, once you go up the pole, you're probably crossing a line there. There's a great article, and you should put in the show notes.
I was going to ask you about
Sean
this.
Hagen of South Philly, legendary article. Each paragraph in this Philadelphia Inquirer story is more Philadelphia than the next, and I say that with the absolute utmost respect. It's just a great. The headline is "Philly Pole Climber Who Caught Shotgun Beers." So he's up on top of a pole. He's catching beers that people are throwing to him. This is after the Phillies went to the World Series. And the headline is "Philly Pole Climber Who Caught Shotgun Beers, Not My First Rodeo."
Yeah,
he shows up to work the next day. I mean, it's an all-time classic article. It's worth a paywall.
The quotes are just French kiss.
There you go.
It's like talking about him talking to his boss or why he didn't show up at work. I forget exactly what it was.
He did show up at work. To his credit, he shows up and he's a little late, and his boss is like, "I knew that was you." Yeah. Anyway, so I will say, just for all my neighbors and friends, I'm a Bills fan. I will say good luck to the Birds this weekend. Maybe by the time you're hearing this, we'll have more iconic Sean Hagen and Philadelphia celebration moments to enjoy on YouTube.
Why is it that none of my teams ever do well?
Hey, buddy.
I know you know this as a Buffalo fan.
life.
I'm a Notre Dame fan, and they've never won a championship in my lifetime.
Well, you can always watch Rudy.
Yeah, right. I could relive the glory days.
I tell my kids who are now old enough to cry after the ends of seasons, I say, we are building, losing builds character, and we are building Taj Mahals. So,
yes, right.
That's it. All right, quick, let's talk about something else before I get teared up here.
Yeah, let's talk about Chicago, my hometown, where we have Mayor Lori Lightfoot, her running for reelection in that city. And
with a lot of primary challengers. Really interesting.
Really?
Over there. Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the local politics
Yeah. It's
anymore.
interesting.
No wonder this happened then.
Yeah, no, that's right. So what did happen, Aaron? You want to give us the facts here?
Yeah, so I think it was a staffer
campaign staffer, yeah.
For on Lori Lightfoot's campaign that sent an email to Chicago public schools and was encouraging teachers in the schools to offer their students extra credit to essentially volunteer to help Lightfoot's reelection campaign.
No bueno? Or bueno?
Somebody should have said something. No, this is no good.
I don't think you have to be a First Amendment scholar or it's just I think the average person can look at this and see that it's at least inappropriate.
Yeah, well, let me ask you about this. Let me steelman this, right? Because I know that you can get course credit. I don't know, in college I remember you could. I don't know about high school for participating in campaigns. But it's usually something that's done of your own volition. It's something your own choice. To the extent you're presented with the opportunities, it's just like kind of on a jobs board. People put it on it. But there seems to be some sort of inappropriateness, right? When you have the mayor, who is the top elected official in Chicago, telling teachers, her employees, to encourage their students to volunteer for her election campaign for course credit.
And that's a part, right? It's not just any campaign. It's not just go get involved in the democratic process, pick a campaign, we'll give you some extra credit. Go get a civic education by knocking on doors. No, it's you're going to knock on doors for my campaign, right? What if you knock on the doors of our competitors? You going to get extra credit? No. That's the problem, right? You're commandeering students to engage in the political process in support of a particular candidate or a particular message. And that's a big, big compelled speech violation. And we've seen that at FIRE. This has come up over the years. We've seen instances like this where we've had professors, I'm thinking of a case that is one of the earliest FIRE cases that I was around for.
The Citrus College case?
Or
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island case where a student is I want to say he's a graduate student in a social work program.
Yep.
Right? And Bill Faulkner, am I getting that right?
I'm looking at our article about Lightfoot here. We don't actually name the student in that Rhode Island college
case. The case is still going on. And this is back in 2006.
David French was still the president of FIRE.
I mean, holy smokes.
Greg was the legal director.
Case. Yeah, and so it's still working its way through the Rhode Island Supreme Court system. But he was required to engage in a group project, I think, for his graduate class in social work, where he had to lobby on behalf of a particular topic. And he proposed a conservative topic. He's a conservative, and his professor said, no, you can't do this. You're going to have to figure out someone else to lobby in support of. He's like, what are you talking about? So the professor was dictating the terms of his public engagement beyond class. It's one thing if it's a Socratic exercise saying, I remember one of the best classes I ever had was a guy, former Bush administration official, NYU undergrad, public policy class, hard class, good class. And he said, you're going to just assigned everybody topics that you're going to make the argument in support of. Me, I was privatizing Social Security. I know more about Social Security to this day than I would have had I not had to argue what was an unfamiliar position to me at the time. And, steel manning your arguments, getting all set, fine, it's a pedagogical exercise within the walls of the classroom. But as soon as you say, and now you're going to go make that argument and sign your name to it and send it to, your elected official, or you're going to go to the State House here in Rhode Island and lobby in support of this thing. I mean, no,
it's not just an academic exercise.
Right. That's something totally different.
Yeah, I remember I had to argue one side or the other of the Export-Import Bank. Talk about
there you go. Right.
I didn't know what side I was going to have to argue on before I arrived in class that day. So you had to research both sides and be prepared to make the case. And that can be a very good academic exercise, as you talk about. But it is different if I had to actually then take it to the next level and write a legislature advocating for the position that I was assigned for that day regarding the Export-Import Bank. And that's essentially what happened here. I mean, actually, it's what happened even earlier than that. One of FIRE's first cases during the U.S. invasion of Iraq, a professor at Citrus College in California compelled undergraduate students to write anti-war letters to former President George W. Bush and penalize those who refused.
You can't do that.
To the college's credit, we wrote them a letter, and they responded swiftly to say, professor can't do that. We're sorry for that. But this Rhode Island case, again, David French, now a New York Times columnist.
Yeah, congrats to David French. That's right.
Just had his first column in the New York Times.
In which he name-checked us. Thank you again.
Yes, he did. Yes, in a very kind of powerful and meaty piece.
It really was. Worth reading.
Where he talks a little bit about some of his experience here at FIRE and how it relates to kind of policing and separate conversation. But anyway, that Rhode Island case that he was involved with didn't make its way up to the Rhode Island Supreme Court until 2019, and it's still an active litigation. We're talking about a case, 2006? My math's not great. 17 years?
Yeah, I joined FIRE August 2006, and that one is still cranking. I mean, it's nuts.
Why? Well, Us non-lawyers here, why would it take so long?
Let me give a shout out to Tom Dickinson and Bill Faulkner's legal team. That one has just been bounced up and down. It's slow. It's before the court, so I'll just leave it there. But the process is winding and wending its way through, and it's
because sometimes, and I don't know exactly what the issues were in this case that had it going up and down, but often in lawsuits you might take one party will take appeal from adverse rulings at the trial court level, like before the case is done, before there's been a final order of judgment sometimes, and that can go up to the intermediate appellate court, and then the losing party at that level might appeal to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court makes a decision that says, okay, and then they reverse the decision and maybe send it all the way down to the trial court to continue the case now that issue's been resolved. And then maybe another issue comes up.
So you're just playing whack-a-mole with different issues
so that's why generally you actually can't appeal. You can't appeal to the next appellate court from the trial court level until there's been a final order of judgment. That way you can just deal with all the issues that have come up through the course of the case. But there are sometimes exceptions where you can appeal, so it's called an interlocutory order, that you can appeal immediately. So I don't know if that's what's going on here, but there's a million different reasons why a case can take a decade to resolve.
I could tell you all about it, but it would take 16 years.
Well, that's why when you're a public interest law firm, you kind of need to build a war chest, because some of these cases can last forever and be very, very expensive. It'd be interesting to see at the outcome of this case, if Bill hopefully wins, what the attorney's fees are.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting. This always reminds me, just the length of the legal process reminds me of Fire's classic case in support of Hayden Barnes.
Valdosta State.
Valdosta State University, where Georgia, he gets expelled. And by the time, Hayden gets expelled, administratively withdrawn, as they put it. And by the time
talk about an Orwellian term.
Exactly. By the time that case is done, so he's an undergrad. I think he's a sophomore. He gets kicked out. By the time the case is done, 2 trips up to the 11th Circuit, he has not only completed, re-enrolled somewhere else, completed his undergraduate degree. He's also graduated from law school. Yeah. So it took a while. So thinking of public interest, civil liberties, fear of missing out. Feel it a little bit here too. So hat tip to the Illinois chapter of the ACLU, which blew the whistle here, and it looks like the mayor has backtracked, right?
Yeah, backtracked fairly quickly. I mean, the Chicago public school teachers also made hay out of this.
Right.
Said it was inappropriate as well. So Mayor Lori Lightfoot kind of got it from all sides.
Good, as well the mayor should. The mayor should know better. And let that be a lesson to all elected officials. Boy, we got 2 municipalities behaving badly.
Hold on, let me look at my notes. Do I have anything else that we should cover? No, I don't know that we have any more municipalities. But
tune in next time. I'm sure we'll have more.
But we do have Indiegogo, Kickstarter, and Crowdfundr.
Okay.
Aaron, you wrote a lengthy piece for Fire's website called Indiegogo. Some of our headlines are great. Like the Super Bowl one is free speech fumble. Phoenix ordinance restricting signs during Super Bowl is offsides on the First Amendment. Aaron's is Indiegogo. Popular crowdfunding sites cancel fundraisers for comic books about gender identity and the U.S. Mexico border. So let me just lay this out here. You have Mike Barron and Richard Bonk, who wanted to publish a new graphic novel called Private American, which was about these superheroes taking on drug cartels, like vigilante superheroes taking on drug cartels on the U.S. Mexican border. Is that correct?
Yeah, the main character he's a Cuban-American ex-Green Beret, and something happened to him or his family, some tragedy at the hands of drug cartels. So he becomes, this vigilante justice seeker at the U.S. border, fighting drug cartels,
human traffickers,
terrorists, other bad actors. He's sort of supposed to be like a mashup of The Punisher, who Mike Barron wrote for that comic book in the past, and like Captain America. So
supposed to be, because the comic book, this is just an idea when it was up on the crowdfunding site, right? Like they hadn't actually written the comic book yet. And there was another gentleman his last name's Braley. Chris Braley, but he didn't create the comic book, right? He was someone who just helped with the fundraising process.
That's right, yeah.
So he set up a Kickstarter campaign to raise $250. They ended up raising $2,500, 10 times more than they initially set out, before Kickstarter suddenly suspended the campaign, right, Aaron?
Right. Yeah, they had a few different campaigns. They had Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and Crowdfundr. And I think the first campaign was actually on Indiegogo, and what happened with Indiegogo is they discovered that the campaign had been restricted so that it wouldn't show up in search results on Indiegogo's site or on major
shadow
search
banning.
Yeah.
Or as
form of
Twitter
shadow
liked
banning.
to term it, visibility filtering.
Right.
Another sort of
Another one, right?
Orwellian
Check.
term, right?
Yeah. The euphemisms always have more syllables too. You know? I think George Carlin had a whole bit about that. How like shell shock went to like battle fatigue to post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So Indiegogo shadow banned the campaign, and then at some point they had a private American dedicated Twitter account that was suspended for reasons unknown by Twitter. All right, so those were kind of the first bumps.
So when
in
you
the road.
shadow ban it, right, you can only find the campaign with a direct link,
you need the actual
which you
URL.
can't share anymore on Twitter.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of one of the points, that I try to make in the article is that you have this things happening on all these different fronts that maybe any particular one in isolation might not be the biggest deal, but the cumulative effect of all of it can have a real impact.
These platforms tend to follow each other when someone gets deplatformed.
Right. And then so what happened with so then they kind of focused on the Kickstarter and the Crowdfundr campaigns. But then on the Daily Kos, the online publication of Daily Kos, someone wrote this article that was slamming Private American. They called it a diatribe of racist propaganda and stochastic terrorism disguised as a funny book. And bear in mind, like you mentioned before, it hadn't been released yet. So this is all just based on the synopsis on the Kickstarter page. And the author of that article encouraged their readers to express displeasure with Kickstarter.
I'd asked them to take it down functionally, and then it looks like in the comments section, some actually said, I reached out.
Yeah. And so some people did that. And then literally, I think the next day, Kickstarter suspended the campaign. Refunded all the money that Braley and Barron had already raised back to the donors, the backers of the campaign. No route for appeal. That was just it. And then I think it was just a few days after that Crowdfundr followed suit and suspended the campaign.
Kickstarter is free to do this, right?
Yes.
It's a private company. But you argue in the piece that it shouldn't, and to the extent it articulates sort of principles or values for their association, that they should live up to that. You write in here that Kickstarter's charter says it will always support, serve, and champion artists and creators. Their website also says, we don't want art world elites and entertainment executives to define our culture. We want creative people, even those who've never made anything before, to take the wheel. We help creators connect directly with their communities, putting power where it belongs.
Right. So they have all this lofty rhetoric on their websites about we're toppling the cultural gatekeepers, and we're connecting our creators directly with their supporters, their communities. But then you're kicking someone off your platform based on the content of their creative work.
Or just the outrage, because these campaigns, in order to go up, they already need to be approved. Kickstarter reviewed and approved the project before it went live.
Right.
Then the Daily Kos article comes up, asks the readers to kind of form a mob and say, Kickstarter, take this down, which they're free to do too. But you'd hope that some of these platforms that are committed to creativity and artistic expression would have a spine.
But essentially, they're just becoming a new type of gatekeeper, right? Whether it's based on their dislike of the content of the art, or whether it's based on the public reaction or angry internet mobs that want this art removed. Like now, you're essentially you're just a new entity that's deciding what art is acceptable for people to consume. Which is completely incompatible.
Becoming the new art world elite and entertainment executives, and putting the power in Kickstarter, not with the artists.
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. That's a really, I think, galling part here, right? As you point out, Nico, it's reviewed, approved, it's up. They have all these lofty promises, and then that goes out the window at even the slightest, sign of controversy or trouble. It reminds me a little bit, and Aaron comes to be Director of Public Advocacy after a stint in our Individual Rights Defense Program, now our Campus Rights Advocacy Program. I'm the same way. It reminds me a little bit of when we write private schools, You make a lot of promises, Harvard, Yale, whatever, Kickstarter, you're free to do so, right? You could say, we're not going to fund stuff featuring Cuban-American guys taking on cartels that daily cost readers don't like. You could have that provision there, but that's not what you say.
Yeah.
So, have a spine, live up to your promises.
Well, some of these platforms, right, are organized around like specific missions or values or kind of ideas, right? I believe there are some crowdfunding sites out there dedicated to just kind of Christian initiatives, right?
Sure.
Just like there are expressive associations or companies focused on just like dating apps for Christians or Jews, or you have those, but then you have platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, which said they're a platform for all artists, all creators to connect with their communities, to break down the gatekeepers. And then they go and do this, and the rules are vague. You ask them why they're doing it, they can't really explain, right? They just kick you over to a policy that essentially grants them full discretion to determine what content can and cannot exist on their platform. And then you raise $2,500. In one case of another artist who was crowdfunding for a comic book, actually took their word at it. They raised $1,000, I believe. This is
$1,500. Nina Paley.
Nina Paley. This is Agents of Hag, and actually printed an order to the printer before their fundraiser was canceled and the money returned to the donors. Can you tell us about Nina Paley and her?
Nina Paley is another comic book. She's a comic book artist and writer, and she's also she's a self-described gender critical radical feminist. So so there's this disagreement among.
That's a direct quote too. You remember it.
There's this disagreement, right, among feminists about transgender issues and the relationship of gender or gender identity and sex and what the definition of a man and a woman is, right? And so she writes this comic book, Agents of Hags, trying to get it self-published, and the main characters are Menopausal Woman and Sidekick. Those are their actual names.
Yeah.
And so I think it's supposed to be kind of representative of like an older generation of feminists.
And the bad guy is named Banhammer.
Banhammer,
right? So it's right squarely. I mean,
it's about how effectively gender-critical radical feminists like Nina are being banned from all these different platforms. Again, This hasn't actually been written yet. This is just a synopsis.
Right, and there are a few synopsis and a few panels that are featured on the fundraising page. So obviously, again, like provocative, controversial material, and. Yeah, she had surpassed her fundraising goal, like you said, placed an order with the printer, and then Indiegogo, without any advance warning, just canceled the campaign. They do appeal to, these companies, they'll appeal to something in their terms of service about like content that shows intolerance towards marginalized groups, something along those lines, or discrimination against marginalized groups, and that's kind of the provision that they rely on. But again, Indiegogo kind of has those same commitments as Kickstarter to creative freedom, to supporting artists, and it's hard to reconcile.
Yeah, I mean, how does FIRE think about these sort of private institutions? Like, this seems like an institution, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, that is different in kind from, say, a payment processor. You wrote a little bit about payment processors, Aaron, or Cloudflare, which is kind of a denial of service. Protects websites against denial of service attacks, or like internet service providers.
We've talked a lot about this because there is always a tension, right? When you have private organizations, there's this tension where you have on one side, the freedom of association that private businesses and organizations generally have, right? So they're generally free to associate or disassociate with other people based on their views, right? Based on their speech. I think most people would recognize, like, for instance, right? I think most people intuitively understand that there's something different about, for instance, Planned Parenthood firing an employee because they're engaging in pro-life advocacy, right? Versus Bank of America denying service to a customer because they engage in pro-life advocacy.
Yeah.
Right? And the idea there is that some organizations and institutions, they kind of have an expressive mission themselves, right? And so if you have employees or members that are hostile to that expressive mission,
Yeah.
right, and have views that are contrary to it, then that can undermine the very kind of purpose of the organization, right?
Or you're a Jewish dating website and you have a bunch of Christians on it, right? You can say, hey,
or
you know, this
neo-Nazis,
is
right?
yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas, you know, Bank of America, right? This is just, or other kind of run-of-the-mill companies that just provide services to the general public, right? That doesn't necessarily have that same concern, or the expressive component isn't as strong, right, for those types of businesses and organizations. And there's a real concern, I think, that if we want to preserve, you know, not just a strong First Amendment, but a culture of free speech, if many of these organizations and businesses get into this game of policing their users or their customers' speech, then that's going to be very bad for a culture of free expression, because it's going to create a huge chilling effect, especially if you're hitting people in their pocketbook.
Yeah,
right.
Particularly the closer they are to like a public accommodation, they just, you know, they provide a service. You have a great line in your article here, Aaron, which talks about kind of the compounding effects of all these different institutions who are ostensibly non-ideological, banning people. And it talks here, just trying to self-publish a book, for example, potentially exposes you to multiple censorship choke points that can limit your access to important resources. Crowdfunding sites to raise funds for your project, social media platforms to promote it, online payment providers to receive your payments or donations, and online marketplaces to sell the book, right? So it functionally excludes you from kind of the marketplace.
Right, and if all those different, all those different elements, or all those different points in the chain, right, are all kind of converging around the same intolerance of the same kind of set of viewpoints or forbidden views and speech, then that has kind of a multiplier.
Yeah,
effect,
it's kind of like
right,
a turnkey cultural authoritarianism. You know, if the political wind blows a certain way and enough pressure can be brought to bear, and those choke points collapse upon each other, like we saw in the private American instance, where one of them follows the other, and they all kind of give each other permission or cover to
right.
choke down on expression that offends a majority or even just a vocal minority of folks. Yeah, then you're denied access, and that's a real problem for our free speech culture. So, you know, what we've got to do, I think, is educate folks to say, yeah, they're getting, you know, payments on PayPal, or it's listed on Indiegogo, but that, first of all, doesn't mean that Indiegogo itself, you know, is quote unquote supporting or endorsing the speech. Just like when we say at a private university, the fact that you've got a registered student group that doesn't mesh with, you know, the university's preferred line on a given political controversy doesn't mean that they're talking for the university. That's number one. And second of all, got to remind people that the answer to speech you disagree with is not to, you know, slap duct tape over somebody's mouth, but let them say it and then critique it, right? Let, you know, Agents of Hag or Private American be published and printed, and then write your own comic book saying why you don't like it, right? That's what we want to get to.
Well, there are two.
Write your critical review.
Write your critical review. Say this is, you know, whatever. You don't like it, but
Well, there are two interesting points there to kind of pull out from what you're talking about, Will. One of which is, as soon as you take a position, you're an institution that's dedicated to one mission, you take a position on like a political or ideological battle happening. The expectation is, from activists on all sides of issues, is that you'll continue to do that sort of thing. And then silence is also, you know, if in the future on an issue you're silent on it, that's also a statement.
You've either reneged on your commitment, or you didn't hold it, or because we now have these very homogenous political blocks where you're either red America, blue America, and it's not like, oh, I support, you know, this idea from the left and this idea from the right. You don't have this heterodox mixing. Now we're all sorted into these camps. So if you support one thing, well, then you probably support the other thing. And if you don't, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah.
I was reading
I
was reading an interesting analysis from Mike Allen, who writes the Axios AM newsletter, about how corporations in 2020 and early 2021 were taking a lot of public stand on political and ideological issues, but have been doing that less so lately, and it's kind of confusing their customers in a certain sense, or even their employees. Right. A lot of the communication around these issues is now happening internally. Why are they doing that? Well, one, you have legislatures and politicians going after them for doing so. Two, you're also just alienating your customers. Like,
how political do you want your bank to be?
Yeah, or Disney, right? Like this non-political entity for so long is now kind of reviled in certain respects by certain segments of the political right because of the stance it took on some of DeSantis's legislation. Now, corporations have taken stances on legislation all the time, but it seems like they're doing it a little bit more often than they used to. One thing I will say, just to the extent that any of these corporations, such as Netflix or Amazon, kind of host content, is when the calls for censorship come, if you take a strong stance early that you're not going to censor, the demands go away.
Yeah.
Right? Like, ever since Ted Sarandos came out and said, no, we're not going to take down Chappelle, like, that just ended that controversy. And Amazon saying they're not going to take down this or that book. It's just like activists don't try that tactic
Right, they're looking for a crack in the armor when you show vulnerability, and then they keep attacking.
It's really interesting now that we've, what are we, 6, 7 months, 8 months into the expansion, the lessons that are relevant from our time defending free speech on public and private campuses, and particularly here again, private campuses, right? Because for years, I would tell general counsels, administrators, whomever, at conferences, have your commitment strategy before, like have your pre-commitment to freedom of speech, make clearly expressed in policy and statement and speech prior to the controversy, because it doesn't matter if it's MSNBC or Fox bringing cameras to your campus. If you can say, look what I said before, right? Or what's on my t-shirt will answer all of your questions. We support free speech, right? If you can do that, if you can be like Odysseus and tie yourself to the mast before you go past the sirens, you're going to be in great shape. But if you're trying to make it up as you go along in that moment, good luck and God bless, right? I mean, and that's, I would say the same thing to these corporate titans, whether it's, Indiegogo or Netflix or whomever. And you're right, Netflix is a good example here. Say it early and often, and then say, this is our policy. You can keep talking. It's not going to change. It's a little bit like parenting, Nico.
Yeah, I know,
a little
right?
bit like, here's the rule. We're going to stick to it. You can talk a lot about it, and that's fine. You got the right to do it, but at the end of the day, this is still the rule. And the rule is either we support creators, even if you don't agree with it, or we don't. And once you say, we'll take one thing down, then
the floodgates open.
Then you're in the void.
We're in Philadelphia, so president of UArts, President Yeager, I forget his first name, when Camille Paglia, sort of the feminist writer, scholar, was, she had controversial statements about Me Too back in 2017, 18, 19.
She was being Camille Paglia, right?
Yeah, she was being Camille Paglia, and students wanted her fired. And the president issued very quickly an email to the entire campus community and said, this sort of censorship, not at UArts. Just ended, right? The demands. So thanks for writing the story. There's some really good art in it, really interesting art in it. For those who want to check it out, again, the article is Indiegogo, popular crowdfunding sites cancel fundraisers for comic books. I want to pick up on a thread that we had 2 podcasts ago involving Hamline University. This is the story that never ends. Listeners who listened to that last episode with Michael Moynihan and Amna Khalid will recall that there was a faculty member at Hamline University, an adjunct faculty member who was teaching a global art survey class, including a module or a lesson about Islamic art history, showed a 14th century Persian masterpiece painting that depicted the Islamic prophet Muhammad. She had noted that they would be showing depictions of Muhammad in the syllabus, and it gave a warning prior to that class as well, saying, if you're, or even the showing of the image, saying if this offends your sensibilities, you don't have to look at this, you won't be punished. Mm-hmm. Regardless, one devoted Muslim student did stick around despite the warnings. Later at a forum said, who do you turn to at 8 a.m. when a teacher offends your religion, which I found to be like kind of peeking over the fence to see what sort of vulgarities your neighbors are behaving in, but leave that there. Anyway, the university doubled down, decided that called out the professor, said that she was Islamophobic, said that respect for the observant Muslim students in the classroom should have superseded academic freedom.
Yeah.
And got lambasted for it.
And even in a statement after that, right, the president comes out in a was it a statement or an op-ed, I want to say?
It was another statement where it said essentially academic freedom should be subject to the dictates of society.
Right. It was like saying, exactly. It was like saying academic freedom should be superseded to religious sensibilities, but 800 words of that.
That was crazy, right? Because usually when you see the news that the president's coming out with a follow-up statement, it's almost always like, all right, at that point they're kind of relenting a little bit,
but
right?
this one was it was like, how dare you? I will always protect my students. In fact, you are also, all my critics also Islamophobic to some extent. And I mean, it was just like it was like the old I'm rubber, you're glue kind of deal. I mean, I was I was impressed by the hubris, right? Like it was like,
chutzpah,
it was a lot.
The fire ended up driving a mobile billboard around campus the first 2 days of classes. I believe it was January 17th and 18th, but I could have those wrong. That asked the question, where does it stop? And depicted the Statue of David in boxer briefs. That's right. Like when you censor art because of sensibilities, where does it stop? And the university and its president got lambasted for this. Ultimately, the chair of the University Board of Trustees says it was never our intent to suggest that academic freedom is of lower concern or value than our students. CARE does not supersede academic freedom. The two coexist, kind of walking back the president's earlier email. And then the faculty, the full-time faculty, voted 71-12 in favor of asking the university president to step down. So they've gotten it from all quarters, and we'll see what happens, I guess.
I will say the response I found generally heartening, right? Setting aside the doubling down from the university president, and even in some perhaps noteworthy quarters, right? So you've got the local chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, the local chapter at CARE, basically telling professors, watch what you say. He comes in, does a session, and tells the chair of the art department basically like, not everybody would look kindly on this. Like, kind of.
I think he said, this is more or less a direct quote, paraphrase slightly, is that if you want to teach some controversial stuff about Islam, teach it in the local library.
Basically, it was something chilling and creepy, like, ask Salman Rushdie or something like that. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like, it was kind of like fuck around and find out, basically, was the message being sent to the faculty there. And it was just this remarkable back and forth with the head of the local CARE chapter, and then the national CARE comes in and says, wait a second, here's our line. It's different than this local chapter's line. We're basically going to disavow that, right? There's no conception of Islam that requires the response we've seen here. They basically distance themselves, which I thought was a very positive sign. National commentary, local commentary, faculty commentary from both the left and the right, it all coalesced around what I thought was a really healthy pro-free speech, pro-academic freedom, wait a second, this is crazy response. And it came from Muslim scholars, it came from, like I say, scholars on the left, right. It just felt like a unified moment of clarity and understanding that if we allow student religious sensibilities in this case, but really student sensibilities at all to be privileged such that academic freedom is a dead letter, we're in deep trouble. So I was heartened. I actually took it as a good sign. I mean, this was a classic case. Again, I've been doing this for 16 years. This is one of the, 3 or 4 most clarifying, crystallizing cases you can imagine where you have the interests so clearly competing, where the professor is doing all of the pedagogically sensitive things and the student's response is a certain way. I mean, it couldn't get more kind of encapsulating of the work that FIRE does on campus here. And this time the cavalry showed up. So I was grateful for that.
We organized a faculty petition that had 400 faculty signatures from across the world, and we had something like 2,000 emailers use our Take Action portal to email the university president.
Which I think is far and away the most popular or the largest sign onto a faculty letter that we've done.
It's just nice to know that there's that response is out there, right? Because it was depressing as hell. And it could have remained depressing as hell. I mean, we could be having this update. If you told me back in the beginning of January that we were going to be having this update, I remember Professor Volek emailing me about this one right around Christmas. And if you had said, come February, this one is still going to be raging, and we're going to have a big partisan food fight where it's folks on the left saying, yeah, this is right, or folks, whatever. You could imagine this going the other way.
Yes,
I'm glad it went this way. The people saying, this is too far. This is nuts.
Yeah, including faculty at the institution itself.
Right, at the institution.
We would love to see that happen more.
It's nice to see faculty stand up for each other, whether it's the chair of the department. And, we're not even talking about the interesting adjunctification angle here, right, where it's an adjunct and it's a non-renewal, if I'm remembering, and they tried to do that dance, like, oh, she was already getting her contract canceled, blah, 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 blah. So this was a good, I don't want to be too happy about it. I would like it not to have taken a month, but yeah, it's nice to see that response both in academia and the general culture was there, because this one got a lot of press too.
You mentioned Rushdie. There was just an article that came out in the New Yorker yesterday by Remnick, who I think got the first interview with Salman Rushdie since he was attacked on stage in New York last summer. And there's just a really striking photo in that of Rushdie. He's got his glasses on with one lens blacked out because I believe he was stabbed in the eye or he's lost function in that eye. And the article is worth a read. If you've read Joseph Anton, his kind of autobiographical memoir of his days in hiding after the Satanic Verses came out, you'll probably get a lot of what's in this article. It also talks about his new book. So it goes through the history, but a couple of really interesting things that came out of it is one that he's having a hard time sleeping. You can imagine that, but he doesn't like to use the word writer's block, he says, but he's also having a hard time writing after this, and it's forced him to kind of reevaluate his security situation because for many years he's kind of lived a normal life. He spoke at Fire's Gala in 2019. We said, "Do you need security?" He said, "No, I don't need it."
He did, and that night I had the honor and privilege of speaking with him a little bit but both before and after the event, and then taking him down after his speech down the elevator to catch a cab in New York. And I never thought twice about it, just because there we were, making small talk with this, revered literary figure, and only reading this article did I realize what kind of a phenomenal act of courage that had been, or in the immediate aftermath of the stabbing, to think, yeah, he was really putting himself out there. It's amazing.
Yeah. And putting himself out there and being such a strong advocate for free speech.
Coming off the stage saying, "Don't be afraid," and then going out into the New York night that night. Yeah, it's a powerful image.
And it's the message is that much more powerful, right? When it comes from someone in his position who when he started living a normal life, the fatwa was very much still in effect, right? He still had this bounty on his head from the supreme leader of Iran.
Oh, thank goodness he's alive.
Yep.
Yeah, so.
I want to just close by asking you about a survey that Fire recently conducted in partnership with the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, where we asked 1,140 Americans if they could name any of the specific rights protected by the First Amendment. And almost a third of Americans could not name a single enumerated right protected by the First Amendment, and another 40% could only name one. Surprising?
Nope. I mean, we got work to do.
Yeah.
Every time I go out to talk to students, faculty, whatever, high school students, graduate students, whomever, general public, I'm struck by the fact that there's a long and arduous road ahead for civil libertarians and folks who care about free speech. Just the educational component of the work we do is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, this is pretty consistent with some findings from, I believe it's, the Annenberg Center?
Yeah, I feel like you see one of these.
Annenberg Constitution
Right.
Civics Day survey.
I feel like you see one of these every year, every couple of years, and it's not surprising, it's depressing, but it's also an opportunity is the way I look at it, right?
Yeah.
So it's always one of the concerning parts is when you see the generational difference of it too. It's the younger generation that tends to have less understanding or less confidence in free speech as an important principle. Like you said, I think just underscores the importance of education, because we often talk about how free speech isn't, it's not an intuitive idea, right? In some ways it goes against human nature because there's a strong impulse to just shut up people that you disagree with.
You might call it an eternally radical idea.
Eternally radical idea, as a CEO, Greg Lukianoff, calls it. The idea of tolerating even speech that you find reprehensible can seem crazy at first blush until you take the time to learn about the reasons why it's important and really process that. So, it makes me wonder, are we, how much is the First Amendment being taught and free speech principles being taught in the K through 12 schools and high schools and stuff?
We have work to do. I want to give a special shout to that 3% of Americans who can name all 5.
I'm not surprised that the right to petition consistently comes in last.
Yeah, that's right. I would say put petition there. We could rank our favorites. We'll do that next time. I would just say work to do, not a surprise, but also it underscores the importance of finding people's self-interest, right? Say, not just the First Amendment protects these rights, but the First Amendment protects your rights. Yeah, that's the key.
Personalize it for them.
You got it.
To put a data point to what you were saying there, Americans aged 18 to 29 were significantly less likely to name free speech than any other Americans. It's protected by the First Amendment, and those aged 60 and older were 70% likely to name one of those rights versus the younger cohort, who's just 55%. So kind of a 15% difference between the likelihood of naming free speech as being protected by the First Amendment between those 18 to 29 and those older than 60. I will say, as someone who works in the communications field, this teaches me something, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about freedom of expression, it's not enough to just name the First Amendment. There's a third of our potential audience, for example, that doesn't know what that means,
Right.
what that protects. So,
Right.
In our messaging, we have to say, freedom of speech, which is protected as a right under the First Amendment or something like that, is kind of just an educational process, if not a clarifying one.
Yeah.
But a word of optimism is that the Freedom Forum, which has conducted surveys on these issues in the past as well, has consistently found that high school students who have taken classes that include content about the First Amendment are more supportive of free speech rights and know that free speech is protected under the First Amendment.
We've got a good story to tell. It's a proud and uplifting history, and makes me happy to work here because, as I say, we really should look at it as an opportunity. I remember being, and people find it in different ways. If each of us can reach somebody every day, we'll make some movements on these numbers. I remember being 8 and listening to Two Live Crew, Banned in the USA, and the rap is, the First Amendment gave us freedom of speech. So what are you saying? It didn't include me? And if you can get that to everybody, maybe not that particular song, but that sentiment, because Two Live Crew won't reach everybody, but that's the work, and that's the work we're doing every day. That's the work that waits for us in our inboxes when we're done recording this podcast.
It's a good note to end on. Will, Aaron, I want to thank you guys for coming onto the show again. Hope to do it again sometime soon.
Been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I have to record the outro from my phone because I forgot to print it up, or I did print it up and I forgot to take it off the printer.
I'm surprised you can't do it by heart, Nico.
The outro I can't because there's too many URLs,
Right,
too many
right.
things to remember. The intro I can. This podcast is hosted and produced by me, Nico Perino, and edited by my colleagues Aaron Reese or Ross. To learn more about So to Speak, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is linked in the show notes. Most of our episodes, including this one, feature video conversation. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram by searching for the handle Free Speech Talk. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/SoToSpeakPodcast. And you can also email us feedback at sotospeak@thefire.org. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a review. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. New reviews help us attract new listeners to the show. Until next time, thank you all again for listening.